The sun dipped low over Chang'an, gilding the palace roofs with molten gold. Banners of crimson silk swayed like tongues of fire against the sky, and the air vibrated with the solemn beat of ceremonial drums. Beneath the carved eaves of a lacquered pavilion, the Tang prince stood tall, surrounded by courtiers, generals and scholars who had gathered to witness his wedding. Incense spirals drifted upward, weaving their fragrance through the twilight, while whispers rippled through the ranks of nobles like reeds stirred by wind. The prince wore his arrogance openly. From childhood, he had been taught that he was a favored son of heaven, skilled in archery, calligraphy, and war. Now, as he prepared to take a bride chosen by decree, he treated the occasion less as destiny and more as performance. His lips curled into a faint smile as the palanquin approached, veiled in scarlet silk. Rumors had long preceded her. The bride was said to be plain, unworthy of the grandeur of the Tang. To the prince, such whispers were truth enough. He expected to see a timid figure, hidden and small, her only value the treaty her family secured. Courtiers exchanged knowing glances, waiting to echo his scorn. The attendants lowered the palanquin. The veiled bride emerged, her movements slow yet deliberate, as though every step carried the weight of centuries. Though no face was revealed, something in her bearing unsettled the rhythm of the moment. Her silence was not weakness, but composure, carved from iron beneath layers of silk. The prince did not extend his hand. He looked upon her as one might regard a flawed ornament, dismissing what he believed was already beneath him. Yet unseen behind the veil, a quiet force stirred, one that would turn mockery into memory and disdain into trembling awe. The palace courtyard seemed to hold its breath as bride and groom crossed its jade-tiled expanse. Scarlet lanterns glowed along the colonnades, their light flickering across carved wooden pillars that rose like sentinels to the heavens. Every detail of the setting spoke of grandeur, sweeping rooftops painted vermilion, guardian lions crouched in eternal vigilance, and silk streamers that fluttered in the evening air like restless spirits. The prince walked ahead, shoulders squared, his brocade robes embroidered with golden dragons that shimmered in the fading light. To him, the ceremony was a formality, a performance before ministers who measured loyalty in appearances. He did not glance back at the figure beneath the veil, for he believed there was nothing worth seeing. The bride followed in measured steps, her embroidered slippers brushing softly against stone. Though her face remained hidden, her composure was undeniable. Every movement was deliberate, balanced, carrying a quiet elegance that seemed to resist the weight of disdain surrounding her. A hush fell over some of the younger courtiers, who, for reasons they could not explain, felt their eyes linger on her longer than etiquette demanded. Inside the grand hall, vermilion columns soared upward to meet a ceiling painted with celestial dragons. The glow of hundreds of lanterns cast ripples of light across polished floors, while the rhythmic chant of officiants filled the space with solemnity. The air itself seemed thick with destiny. The prince, basking in his role, received bows and blessings as though they were beneath his notice. Yet when the bride lowered her head at the altar, the grace of her gesture unsettled something within him. It was fleeting, a flicker at the edge of perception, but it left an impression sharp as an arrow's whisper. The drums softened to a steady heartbeat as the couple approached the altar. Shadows stretched long across the jade tiles, touched by the dying light of day. Courtiers bowed in practiced unison, their silken sleeves sweeping the floor in waves of muted color. The air shimmered with incense, the spirals of smoke blurring the line between heaven and earth. The prince stood proud, his gaze fixed not on the bride, but on the audience of ministers and nobles. To him, their judgment mattered more than the veiled figure at his side. He smirked faintly, confident that their whispers of his bride's supposed plainness only affirmed his superiority. He imagined himself as the sun, and she merely a shadow trailing in his light. yet the bride's presence defied the story whispered about her. Beneath the veil, her posture held a stillness that demanded attention. Each motion, lifting her hands, bowing before the altar, adjusting the folds of her robe, carried a refinement that was neither forced nor rehearsed. A subtle rhythm echoed in her grace, one that seemed to harmonize with the solemn chants resonating through the hall. Some courtiers shifted uneasily. They had expected clumsiness, awkwardness, something to confirm the rumors. Instead, they found themselves glancing twice, caught off guard by a dignity that seemed to belong to someone far above the role she had been assigned. The prince, blind to these murmurs of doubt, allowed his disdain to grow. His thoughts lingered on the veil, imagining the plain features it concealed. He looked forward to the moment of revelation, not with curiosity but with mockery prepared in his heart. And yet, behind that scarlet silk, a calm breath gathered. It was not resignation, but anticipation, the quiet certainty of a truth that would not remain hidden for long. The ceremony pressed onward, layer upon layer of ritual unfolding like an ancient scroll. Golden vessels of wine were lifted, poured, and exchanged. The flames of tall candles wavered as attendants recited verses older than the dynasty itself. Each movement was codified, each bow rehearsed by generations. To most, the event was predictable. A binding of households, a transaction cloaked in splendor. The prince endured it with an air of indifference. He raised the ceremonial cup with practiced ease, his eyes half-lidded, as though the weight of tradition barely touched him. His mind strayed to matters of hunting grounds, military campaigns, and political intrigue, subjects more worthy of his energy than the woman beside him. To him, she was only a pawn, veiled and silent, a presence that mattered little to his legacy. But as the bride accepted her cup, her movements drew murmurs from those attentive enough to notice. Her hands, slender and steady, held the vessel with reverence that did not falter. The red silk of her sleeve rippled like water, catching the lantern glow in folds of quiet beauty. There was no hesitation, no clumsy pause. Instead, her gestures seemed to breathe life into the hollow traditions, imbuing them with a sense of living grace. The hall grew still, as though the very air leaned in to watch her. A subtle shift passed through the courtiers, a collective awareness that something did not match the tale they had believed. They expected plainness, weakness, perhaps shame. What they found was composure that rivaled the painted serenity of imperial portraits. The prince did not yet see it. He interpreted her calm as emptiness, her grace as compliance. He smirked, believing he stood on higher ground. But the truth behind the veil pressed closer, waiting for its moment to alter everything. The rituals concluded, and the grand hall swelled with the sound of gongs. Attendants ushered the couple toward the banquet prepared in their honor. Tables heavy with lacquer and jade groaned beneath platters of roast pheasant, fragrant rice, and delicacies adorned with carved garnishes. Lanterns swayed above, their crimson light pooling across the polished stone floor, painting every gesture with warmth. The prince took his place with effortless authority, his robes spreading around him like the wings of a dragon. He sat tall, every movement sharp and deliberate, ensuring that all eyes remained on him. He spoke little, but the curve of his mouth conveyed disdain well enough. The courtiers, quick to mirror his mood, allowed soft laughter to ripple through the hall, mockery dressed in civility. They glanced toward the veiled bride, expecting her to shrink under the weight of scorn, yet she did not falter. Moving with calm precision, she accepted her seat at his side, her scarlet veil draped like a flame, concealing her face, yet emphasizing the stillness of her presence. Every motion, lowering herself, arranging her robes, lifting her chopsticks, was imbued with an elegance that seemed beyond training. It was instinctive, as if the essence of refinement flowed through her veins. A few ministers exchanged uncertain looks. Was this truly the woman deemed unworthy of beauty? Though they could not see her features, there was no denying the aura she exuded. Grace radiated from her like a quiet melody, soft yet impossible to ignore. The prince, blinded by arrogance, chose only to interpret her silence as emptiness. Inwardly, he laughed at the fate he believed had bound him to mediocrity. But beneath the veil, her calm endured, an unshaken stillness that carried the weight of revelation waiting to arrive. The banquet unfolded with ritual precision. Courtiers raised cups of warmed wine, offering polished words of blessing that rang hollow against the carved pillars of the hall. Musicians plucked at gutian strings, their melodies weaving through the air like silver threads. Dancers stepped in graceful arcs, their sleeves unfurling like petals, but even their artistry seemed dim compared to the quiet tension pulsing between bride and groom. The prince accepted the toasts with absent ease, his expression shifting between arrogance and boredom. Each compliment fed his pride, and each sidelong glance at the veiled bride reminded him of the mockery he carried in his heart. He thought of her as a blemish upon his otherwise flawless image, a chain fastened to him by politics. He did not care to notice how the hall itself seemed to bend around her silence. The bride, however, remained composed. Every gesture she made resonated with quiet strength. The way she lifted her cup, the way her posture never wavered, the stillness of her breath. Courtiers who dared look closer began to feel the dissonance between rumor and reality. Though her face was hidden, there was no mistaking the aura that surrounded her, an elegance that belonged not to a servant of politics, but to someone born to command respect. Whispers flickered at the edges of the hall. Ministers leaned subtly toward one another, their jade pendants brushing as they murmured. Could it be that the stories were wrong? The unease spread like ripples across water, faint but undeniable. The prince noticed the whispers, but dismissed them. In his eyes, they were idle gossip, unworthy of attention. He could not yet fathom that the woman he mocked as plain would soon eclipse his arrogance, and that her silence carried the promise of a revelation greater than any banquet. As the banquet deepened into night, the hall glowed with an almost unreal brilliance. Lanterns swayed gently in the draught, their crimson light glimmering across jade goblets and polished bronze platters. Outside, the wind stirred the pines, but within the air was thick with anticipation. The prince reclined against his seat, satisfied with the performance of his authority. Every smile cast his way was another stone in the fortress of his pride. Yet beneath the surface, something shifted. Courtiers who once smirked in easy alliance with the prince now found their eyes straying toward the veiled bride. There was no ostentation in her bearing, no need to demand attention, yet she commanded it nonetheless. The way she lifted her sleeve, the calm rhythm of her breath, the way her silence resonated louder than the musician's melodies, it was impossible to ignore. For the first time, a few dared to wonder if her rumored plainness had been a lie, but the veil remained, stubborn and scarlet, keeping her secret hidden. This only deepened the sense of suspense, like a bowstring drawn back, waiting for its release. The prince, oblivious to their shifting thoughts, allowed his disdain to harden. Inwardly, he resolved that when the veil was lifted, he would expose her supposed ugliness to the entire court. He imagined the laughter, the murmurs of mockery, the reinforcement of his superiority. It pleased him to think that her humiliation would seal his dominance. But the bride sat unshaken, as though she knew the course of fate better than anyone around her. She was not diminished by his arrogance, nor by the whispers it inspired. Her stillness carried the certainty of a storm approaching, silent, patient, inevitable. The hour grew late, and yet the banquet's splendor showed no sign of fading. Servants refilled golden cups, dancers traced circles across the polished floor, and the air shimmered with the mingled scents of roasted meats and sandalwood incense. Still, beneath the surface of feasting and music, the true drama waited, veiled in scarlet. The prince's thoughts sharpened on that moment. He had grown restless, no longer amused by the formalities of ritual or the shallow laughter of ministers. His pride demanded a spectacle, something to reaffirm the power he believed unshakable. In his heart, he imagined the unveiling as a moment of triumph. Her plainness revealed, her dignity stripped, and his superiority immortalized in the whispers of the court. The arrogance in his gaze was as sharp as a blade, but the bride remained untouched by the undercurrent of cruelty that swirled around her. Still seated in composed silence, she seemed as immovable as a mountain beneath falling snow. Though hidden, her presence filled the hall more strongly with each passing moment. There was no desperation in her stillness, no fear, only the patience of someone who knew that truth needed no defense. Among the courtiers, whispers grew bolder. Some leaned forward unconsciously, as though drawn by an unseen thread. Others exchanged glances, quietly unsettled by the contradiction between rumor and the grace radiating before them. A few even felt a flicker of shame for their earlier smirks, though they dared not voice it. Outside the hall, the wind howled against the palace walls, rattling the lanterns that guarded its gates. Within, anticipation tightened like a bowstring pulled to breaking. The veil, untouched, burned brighter under the lantern glow, its silence louder than the prince's arrogance. Destiny hovered at the edge of revelation. The night deepened, and the banquet reached its height. Musicians played with fervor, dancers spun in arcs of silk, and goblets clinked like bells across the hall. Yet none of these performances held the guests' attention as firmly as the veiled bride. She sat in silence, an unmoving flame amidst the restless spectacle, her scarlet veil glowing like a lantern of fate. The prince, restless, narrowed his eyes. He had grown weary of waiting. To him, patience was weakness, and tonight he sought to carve his dominance into memory. With deliberate slowness, he turned toward her, his expression sharpened into a mask of arrogance. The hall quieted, sensing the shift. Whispers trailed off, fans stilled mid-motion, and even the musicians faltered before regaining their rhythm. All eyes followed his gaze to the veiled figure beside him. "Let it be seen," his thoughts declared silently, his heart swelling with pride. He imagined the veil lifted, the court gasping at her supposed plainness, and his mockery sealing her humiliation. To him, it was not a marriage, but a performance staged for power. But the bride did not move under the weight of his stare. She sat with composure, hands folded gently in her lap, as if she had known this moment would come and had prepared for it long before. Her stillness unnerved even those who sided with the prince. They saw no trembling, no shrinking into shadows, only a quiet authority that seemed to grow stronger the longer she waited. The hall leaned toward her, suspended between arrogance and revelation. Outside, the moon rose high, silvering the palace rooftops. Inside, the scarlet veil shimmered with the promise of truth. The moment of unveiling had not yet come, but already the balance of power had begun to shift. The hall was wrapped in silence so profound that even the faint crackle of lantern wicks seemed deafening. Every guest waited, eyes fixed upon the veiled bride. The banquet's laughter had dissolved into expectation, the kind that tightens the air until it feels heavy enough to crush a man's chest. The prince, basking in what he believed to be control, rose from his seat. His robes, heavy with gold embroidery, cascaded like the wings of a dragon unfurling. His steps echoed against the polished stone, deliberate and sharp, meant to remind the audience that he alone held authority. He paused beside the bride, looking down at her as one might regard a subject unworthy of the throne. Slowly, With a hand adorned by jade rings, he reached toward the veil, his heart swelled with pride, savoring the anticipation of her supposed disgrace. He pictured the whispers, the poorly hidden smirks, the echo of mockery that would secure his superiority. To him, this was not unveiling a bride, but unmasking a flaw before the empire. But the bride did not flinch. She sat as steady as carved stone, her hands resting gracefully in her lap. Though her face was hidden, her presence radiated a strength that unsettled the hall. Courtiers, who had once leaned forward for the spectacle, now hesitated, unease flickering across their faces. What if the rumors had deceived them? What if the prince's arrogance had led them astray? The veil glowed scarlet in the lantern light, its folds alive with golden shadows. It seemed less a covering than a promise. Each heartbeat drew the moment closer, each breath weaving tension into the very air. The prince's hand hovered, poised to reveal not humiliation, but a truth he could never have prepared for. The veil stirred as the prince's hand descended, the scarlet silk trembling faintly in the lantern light. The hall leaned forward as one body, breaths held, hearts pounding in unison. Outside, the wind rattled the palace lanterns, their glow flickering across carved pillars, as if heaven itself anticipated what was about to unfold. With a flourish meant to humiliate rather than honor, the prince lifted the veil. The fabric slid away like fire unraveling, spilling its brilliance onto the floor. For a heartbeat, silence consumed everything. The music ceased, goblets stilled, even the breath of incense seemed to falter. Beneath the veil was not plainness nor weakness. Her face, revealed in the golden light, carried the radiance of dawn breaking over mountains. Features refined yet strong, eyes calm as jade pools, lips touched with quiet resolve. It was a beauty not of fleeting charm, but of enduring grace, the kind that commanded reverence rather than desire. The prince froze. His smirk withered before it could bloom into mockery. The strength in her gaze pierced through his arrogance like an arrow through silk, steady and undeniable. His chest tightened, not with pride, but with something unfamiliar, something dangerously close to awe. A murmur rippled through the hall, rising like a tide. Courtiers exchanged bewildered glances, their earlier smirks replaced with astonishment. Some bowed their heads instinctively, compelled by the dignity radiating from her. Rumors of ugliness crumbled in an instant, swept away by truth, too vivid to be denied. The bride did not gloat, nor did she falter. She simply sat in silence, her beauty matched by composure, as though the unveiling had been inevitable, the outcome preordained. The hall had witnessed a transformation, but in truth, nothing had changed. Only the blindness of arrogance had been stripped away. The silence that followed the unveiling lingered like a sacred hymn. The hall, once filled with arrogance and laughter, had been struck into reverence. Every noble, every minister, every servant bowed their heads in quiet acknowledgement of the truth revealed before them. The woman once mocked as plain now sat unveiled, her beauty as radiant as the lanterns overhead, her composure unshaken, her dignity undeniable. The prince remained frozen, his pride shattered by the weight of his own folly. What he had expected to be a moment of ridicule had instead become a revelation that unsettled his very soul. He searched her face, not only for beauty, which was undeniable, but for the strength that had unnerved him long before the veil was lifted. It was there in her eyes, steady and unyielding, a mirror that reflected both his arrogance and his weakness. For the first time, his heart faltered. The fortress of superiority he had carried since boyhood cracked, and through the fracture entered something he could neither command nor deny, humility, and with it, a trembling awe. The mocking smile he had prepared would never return. Instead, silence claimed him, heavy with unspoken remorse. The courtiers shifted uneasily, their earlier smirks gone, their loyalties recalibrated in an instant. Whispers now spoke not of the prince's arrogance, but of the bride's quiet power, her presence so commanding that even the Son of Heaven seemed subdued before her. The bride did not bask in victory. She did not need to. Her truth had revealed itself, unforced, inevitable. She lowered her gaze only to the altar, not to the man beside her. In that moment, the balance of the union changed. It was no longer a performance of dominance, but the beginning of a lesson the prince would never forget.